Hello, hello, everybody. I am so excited today to speak with a lady called Joanna Joy. Now, between you and I have Joanna's newsletter. It comes through to my email. I have an email full of rubbish, and there's very few people I read, but I always read Joanna's work. And so about 6 weeks ago, I messaged her and I said, I just have to tell you how much I love what you're writing. And I was quite like fangirled really when she messaged me back, and we just were immediately chatting, and I said, I really want you to come and talk on the live with me. So to introduce yourself, Joanna, say hello.
Hi, my name's Joanna Joy, and I'm really pleased to be here and talking with you. And thank you so much for reaching out and asking me to come on with you. Yeah,
it's really exciting to talk to you because you've got such an interesting tale to tell. Now, you are a shamanic practitioner, but with a difference somewhat. For a start off, you're not in the UK, so tell everybody about the journey that you've gone on to be in this beautiful room that you're in today.
thank you. Yes, I moved to Guatemala with my children about 3 years ago, nearly 3 years ago, and made that decision for a few reasons. It was just when COVID hit, and I did not want to be restricted, locked in, told what to do. I'm not very good at being told what to do. And I had seen this kind of thing coming for many years. I have been being warned about a big catastrophic global situation for many years. And I knew that when it happened, I needed to leave. And so when COVID happened, I was like, the bells started ringing, and I was like, right, that's my cue. Let's go. I had just bought a boat in Guatemala, not intending to live or move to Guatemala at all. Guatemala was not on my map for, oh, I want to go there. I didn't know anything about Guatemala. But as the universe so often does, it leaves you a breadcrumb trail and kind of guides you to where you need to be. And I had just broken up with my partner, Dan, the father of my 3 children. We'd just split up. We'd sold a boat. I got paid out some money, and I bought this boat that was in Guatemala, intending on bringing it back to the UK. It was a sailing boat. Anyway, then COVID happened. Everywhere locked down, the world locked down. I couldn't get to Guatemala because they locked the borders. I was sat in England with no home, 3 children. I'd sold one boat, couldn't get to the other boat, had to kind of, shift around for a few months until the borders to Guatemala reopened, coming into winter of 2020, autumn 2020. And I knew that the UK government was going to bring in much harsher restrictions for winter. And I said to my kid's father, I'm worried about what's going to happen. Can I go to Guatemala, sort the boat out, and watch and wait and see what goes on from there? And he said, okay, that's fine. So I took the kids, and what ensued was really quite harsh removal of civil liberties as I see it. Anyway, so the boat was not all it was cracked up to be. It was kind of like the bait. It was the carrot on the end of the stick to get me there, actually. And so I ended up selling the boat pretty soon after I arrived, and then came up to the mountains because it was so hot on the coast. And being from Northern Europe, it was just undoable for me and my kids. We were sweating buckets. So we came up into the mountains in Guatemala, where it's a lot cooler, found ourselves in a beautiful, amazing place called Lake Atitlan, which is in the heartlands of the indigenous Mayan people, and just loved it, fell in love. I found my spiritual home, actually, is what happened. And the Mayan shamanism just spoke to me so deeply and clearly. It's still a living shamanic culture, interspersed with Catholicism, which is a strange and interesting mix. But the people here still very much live a strong connection to the earth, to spirits, to their ancestors, to the plants and the animals and the great spirits of the land, to the volcanoes that are constantly rumbling here and erupting. And the spirit of the lake just called me here, and it said, you have to stay here. And the volcanoes did too. So I was very much drawn by the spirits of the land, and told that I had work to do here, that I had learning to do here, and that I needed to stay. So that's how we ended up here. And I sold my boat, and I invested. I was told again by my guides to put all that money into cryptocurrency. I had no experience with cryptocurrency or trading or stocks or shares or nothing like that. They just said to me, put it all into crypto. So I did, made a whole pile of money, and then bought a house with Bitcoin. It was like the universe just laid out this very easy step-by-step process to facilitate me buying house and land here, because they wanted me to stay, actually.
What an astonishing story.
Yeah.
So
that was all in 2020 and 2021, and that's how I got here.
So I'm fascinated to know more about the shamanic Catholic culture. So what can you tell me about that? That's so beautiful.
So the Mayan people make up, the indigenous Mayan population here in Guatemala make up over 80% of the population. So it's still very strong. You know, the indigenous culture is very, very strong. And they still hold a lot of their indigenous spiritual beliefs and ceremonies and practices. You know, it didn't get wiped out by the Spanish when they came and colonized. The Spanish tried, they had a very good go, but they didn't completely eradicate everything. So the indigenous languages are still spoken here. They are the primary languages. Spanish is a secondary language. And the indigenous people are strong. You know, they run things here. It's not the police, it's not the government, it's not the mayor, it's not the local government. It's the people, it's people power. And it's a fascinating thing to observe people actually running their own lives with a community interest. You know, they're very much community based, they're very much family based, and they have such a strong connection to spirit and the land still. And that's interspersed with Catholicism. And so you'll have Mayan ceremonies happening where they will also call Mother Mary and they'll also call Jesus, whilst at the same time stirring the fire and throwing lots of stuff into it to pay and honor the spirits of the land. You know, it's an interesting blend and a mix. I guess they've kind of decided that they'll take the best of everything and stir it into one big melting pot. Yeah
definitely. I think to a certain extent, you know, when you see people working like the new age divine feminine work is very much like that, they, you know, it's pagan, but they still call on Jesus, they still call on Mary Magdalene. It's a similar thing, isn't it? It's becoming a hodgepodge, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I know that sadly some months ago you had quite a tragedy in the family, didn't you? And it's affected the work that you're doing.
Yes, absolutely. So I started getting a lot of very strong information coming through in November, December last year from my ancestors telling me that a close member of the family was going to die. Now, I've had these kind of warnings before. They told me when my dad was going to die, and they were right. They told me when my grandma was going to die, and they were right. And they told me when I was going to have a miscarriage to the date, and they were right. So when I get these kind of strong warnings, I take a lot of note of them. So they started telling me that somebody in my family was going to die, but they wouldn't tell me who, which was strange, because normally they do. Normally they give me that information. And so I had assumed that it was my mother who was going to die. They pretty much pinned it down to a date as well. They told me that I needed to prepare myself for maybe going back to pack my house down.
Oh, lost sound then for a minute. You're all right. Carry on. Sorry.
Okay. Is it clear? Can you hear me?
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, my ancestors basically told me to pack my house down, to get somebody in to house sit for the animals, because I've got dogs and chickens and cats, and to organize myself for having to leave at a moment's notice. So I did all of that, you know, which is quite a big thing, really. I spent a month, 6 weeks, preparing myself to potentially have to leave. And they told me that I needed to have all those preparations done by the 3rd of February this year. And on the 7th of February, I got a phone call, and I was waiting for a phone call. I told my kids even that, you know, we might get a phone call to let us know that somebody had died. On the 7th of February, I got a phone call to find out that their dad had killed himself. So my life partner, although we had split up at that point, you know, we spent 12 years together, we had 3 children together, and he was due to actually move out to Guatemala to come and be with us. He was trying to sell his boat in England to come here. And so that was a massive, massive shock for myself and my children and for our wider social circles. But it catalyzed a whole new chapter for me in terms of my work and my focus. And what I ended up doing straight away was caring for his soul. Suicide is traumatic, and you know, people do that when they are at their last point of breaking point. It's a last desperate act, isn't it, to evade their own pain or find a way out. And so what I discovered in doing the shamanic work for him, and bear in mind I'm very experienced in doing soul retrieval for living people, soul retrieval for dead people as well as crossing spirits over to the light. I'm a psychopomp and depossession practitioner, and so I knew all of the methodology in terms of what to do for him and how to do it. But what really surprised me was firstly how many pieces his soul had fragmented into. There were over 50 pieces. It took me a month, and I just get to the point where I thought we'd finished and another piece would turn up, and very often they were turning up in my children. He desperately wanted to come back to his kids. His soul, all he was interested in was finding his children and wanting to be with them. And my kids are 6, 8, and 10, so they're still quite small, but they have gifts, they have psychic skills, they can hear spirit, they can feel it when the spirit's in their body. And so my children were getting possessed by his soul parts. And so there was a lot of work to do. And over the first month after he died, I cared for his soul. I did a lot of depossession work with my children, and we gathered up his soul parts as they turned up, and we crossed them over to the light. And as more and more pieces were transitioned, more pieces came. It was like they knew that there was a pathway through. The first piece was very hard. He didn't want to go. He was in my daughter's body. He didn't want to leave. He was stuck in there. He was like, I'm not going anywhere. You can't make me. You know, he was very resistant to the whole process. But gently and slowly, in depossession work, we call it compassionate shamanic depossession, because we are trying to help the soul of the deceased spirit. We're not trying to kick them out. It's not an exorcism. It's not, you know, booting them out to figure out what to do. You know, we care for them and we look after them and we give them what they need so that they can be at peace. And this is a key point in this kind of work, is that his soul wasn't at peace. Of course it wasn't. He killed himself. And so there was a lot of work to do to bring his soul to peace. And so we started doing ceremonial work, elemental ritual work, working with the elements of earth, air, fire, and water to bring peace to his soul. And, you know, I'd learned how to do this through the ancestral healing work that I've been doing for many years. I know how to bring a soul to peace. And so I was using those methods with his newly deceased soul parts, and it worked great. So it took us a month to completely transition all of his soul parts over to the light. And once he was over there, you know, he became lighter and brighter, happier. The soul parts that we were communicating with, that were still essentially disembodied ghost soul parts here, were angry, sad, going through the loops of his own suicidal thought processes. So my son would come and say, Mummy, I've got horrible words going through my head saying, just kill yourself, just kill yourself. And I was like, okay, that's not you. That's not you. That's your dad. And he doesn't know that he's dead yet. So we had to tell his soul many, many times that he had died, because quite a lot of his soul parts didn't even know that he was dead. And this is very common with souls who die either inebriated or intoxicated or heavily medicated, or in a very traumatic way, is they kind of block out the fact that they're actually that they've died. So we had to tell him quite a lot of times. There was a loop, there was a cycle that we went through to let him know what had happened. And he was deeply, deeply, deeply sorry about what he'd done. He was very, very upset at what he'd done. He just constantly kept on asking for forgiveness from me and from the children. And, you know, we gave him that because he was a tormented soul. He wanted peace, he wanted forgiveness, and we gave him that with no questions asked. And that's what he needed to be able to cross over to the light. So that was the first month. And after that, I started having a lot of strange social issues coming up with his family, some members of his family, some of his friendship circles, and some of our collective community circles that we'd been in the UK for a long time. We'd lived on boats I'd lived on boats for 20 years. All my children were born on a boat. Dan and I had shared 2 boats together. So we're boat people, although now I'm a volcano witch, but before we were boat people. And so we had a strong community of other boaters. And I had a very strange experience of a lot of people in this community turning against me and blaming me for his death because we'd left. And so I had to navigate this whole experience of persecution, betrayal, misrepresentation, demonization. And as all of these experiences started coming up, basically I was told that I wasn't welcome to go back to England to go to his funeral, that I was not wanted, that there would be problems if I went. So my children and I didn't go. After all that preparation time, we didn't end up going. And actually it was better because here we were at peace. We're supported very beautifully by our community here and by the Mayan community. But it was very strange. And so when I started asking my guides and my ancestors what this was all about, they said to me, his death has triggered a whole pile of karmic patterns for him and your family, for you and your children to have to deal with. And I kept on getting this metaphor or this image of somebody throwing a grenade into a lake full of fish. And, you know, when the grenade goes off, all the fish rise to the surface. It was like that had happened. His death was the grenade going off in the lake, and all these karmic past life patterns were rising to the surface. And as I was talking to his soul through that first month and helping to cross them over, and as I was starting to receive all of this backlash from our community and some parts of his family, I started to realize that there was a witch hunt going on for me, and that all of these patterns were rising up from past lifetimes of experience. And I started digging deeply into these karmic stories. And what I discovered was that we had been together in many, many other lifetimes, but in the last 5 previous lifetimes, he'd killed himself in all of those. And we'd had the same children in 4 of those lifetimes. So we had been through this suicide grieving process multiple times in multiple lives. And it all sourced back, it all rooted back to 6 lifetimes previously, where he had been a conscripted Viking warrior. And he had essentially been forced to commit atrocities, rape, pillage, murder, etc., that he didn't want to do, and that he was deeply ashamed of and deeply guilty about the things that he had done. And there was a lot of stuff in there around alcohol and abuse of alcohol and drugs to a certain extent in this lifetime, but rooting back to that lifetime where his relationship with alcohol had become a numbing agent, really, to numb the guilt and the shame and the pain that he was carrying from being a Viking warrior and having committed horrific acts. And so as this story unfolded, I found myself using the same methods that I've spent 10 years working with to do ancestral healing work, but using them on our karmic lines for his soul through many lifetimes, for my own soul as the widow who'd been left with children in many lifetimes because he'd killed himself, and for our kids as well, who were now experiencing this for, you know, multiple times too. And so my children and I went into this deep, deep karmic healing process for several months. And we started just clearing patterns using elemental ritual, earth, air, fire, and water to clear patterns. And what came out of this was a sense of peace for myself, my children, and the soul of Dan that none of us had ever experienced in this lifetime, certainly. All of us had always had underlying angers or resentments or conflict energy within the family. And all of that just died down and came to peace. His soul was at peace. Our souls became far more peaceful. And so the grieving process that we went through was very deep, but we've come out of the other end of that really with a sense of peace and you know, I'm not going to say happiness. We're not happy about what's happened, but there is a sense of having achieved something within that work that had not, you know, we're in a better place, all of us now, than before when he died, because we were all carrying these deep, deep, deep wounds from previous lifetimes, which now aren't there. So it's been a very strange and interesting journey. And the backlash that I experienced from our community and Dan's family is what started me writing, actually. You know, I felt like I wanted to stand my ground and speak my truth. I was being silenced. I was told I wasn't allowed to be at the funeral. I was written out of his life as they told his life story at his funeral. We were together for 12 years. You know, we did a lot of stuff together. That was a quarter of his life. And they didn't mention my name once. It was like they were trying to erase me. And so I started to write, to tell my side of the story, to speak my truth. And initially, that writing was to answer all of these very nasty accusations of putting the blame of his death at my door. But then I started to understand, as my children and I started going through this process of doing the healing work for him and for our own souls as well, that there was a much bigger story unfolding over many lifetimes. It was actually a story of deep love and deep tragedy that took us through the Viking lifetime. It took me through the medieval witch trials. It took us through our lifetime as Romany travelers in Nazi Europe and being gassed in gas vans by Nazis. You know, all of these stories started to unfold, and all of the trauma of those stories started to show itself. And so we did very, very deep ceremonial karmic healing work to bring all of our souls to peace with all of these traumatic events that had happened so many times. And I was told I needed to write about it. And part of me expressing this truth and this story is part of one of the elemental rituals of air, of me bringing my own soul to peace. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of the bare bones of it, really.
So beautiful. And I just cannot tell you how sorry I am for all of your loss. Not just for Dan, but for all his family and the way that they treated you. I'm so sorry that's happened to you. You are really quite inspirational, the way that you've worked through it. And for me, it's fascinating to hear, because when all the work that I've been doing with the Melissa priestesses, you know, the word psychopomp comes up over and over again, and my head goes, I don't really know what that is. I do, but I don't. So to hear somebody actually talking about the ins and outs of specifically, this is what I did, this is how it helped, it's absolutely fascinating to hear it. Would you be able to expand on the elemental work of what you were saying, earth, air, fire, water? So how does that work in terms of soul retrieval, if that's okay to ask?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not so much using it for soul retrieval. It's more about bringing souls to peace. And so you can use it both karmically for your own soul, to bring your own soul to peace from karmic trauma from previous lifetimes. But you can also use it ancestrally to clear intergenerational trauma from your ancestral lines. And it's basically a process which I was taught by a lady called Christina Pratt, and she runs the Last Mask Center in New York. And she has this method which is essentially based on somatic movement, and it's all about allowing your body to display the patterning that is held either from karmic trauma or from ancestral trauma. And so you are inviting your body to move in whatever way the pattern wants to show itself. And there are lots of questions to ask, and it's a dance-based process. So there is a playlist, and you allow your body to move in whatever way it wants to. You basically invoke the pattern, either specific patterns that you want to work on because you know they're there, or you allow whatever's ready to come up to come through. And so you're essentially channeling the trauma patterns of your own soul or from your ancestors. And in that process, if you know the right questions to ask, you get a lot of information, and it comes through via the body. It comes through emotionally. It comes through mentally. You know, you get information, but you also get emotional responses and reactions. And for me, I'm clairsentient. I just know information. I don't see things so much. I'm a knower, and I'm an empath. So I receive emotional information of what's happened because I can feel it in my heart. And it's very emotional experience. So I use this method, and I've been using it for many years to do ancestral work. And when Dan died and when these karmic patterns started coming up, my ancestors, they gave me a light bulb moment. They said, you know, you can use the same method for karmic stuff. And I was like, wow. And so I started doing that work karmically, setting the intention to work with it karmically. And it was just amazing. It was just amazing. So I was guided by my guides to dance twice a week. They were like, there's a lot of patterns coming up. You need to devote time to this. Dance twice a week. And in that process, you essentially diagnose the pattern, you witness it, and you ask for an elemental remedy to clear it. And so you're guided by your ancestors, your luminous ancestors, your well-rested and compassionate ancestors who are at peace and are there to guide and protect you. They are the guides of this process. And they're the ones that bring forward the patterns. They're the ones that tell you what happened, and you embody it, you experience it, you witness it. And they're the ones that say, okay, to clear it, you need to do this kind of ritual with these elements. And it might just be one element, or it might be a combination of a few. What I've discovered is that the really, really deepest, darkest, most stagnant patterns require all four elements in some combination. And then you go and do your rituals. And for some of them, it might only take a few, but for quite a lot of them, you need to repeat them. And it's a very intuitive process. I would say it's very creative as well. You know, I was doing this with my children. This work was for all of us, and they're little, you know, they're little. So I had to make it child friendly. And so we created a ritual which was based on dipping sweetbreads in hot chocolate, which is a local Mayan tradition, with a candle and saying some special words. So we had all of the elements there. There was earth with the bread, there was water with the hot chocolate, there was a candle, and the words that we were speaking were the air. And so, you know, I essentially requested child-friendly ceremonies that I could do with my kids so that their souls were being brought to peace as well. And this was like a full-time job for us for 2 months, is we had so many patterns coming up. We were doing ceremonies all day, but it was fun, you know, and it was lovely. Kids love the elements. They love the elements. They love playing with earth. They love picking flowers. They love doing stuff with water. You know, it's very naturally child-based work, actually. And so we did it together. And the thing that made it very powerful was that they really wanted to do that work for their dad. You know, they love him deeply, and they wanted to heal him. They wanted to put him in a better place than he was. And so they were very motivated to participate within it for all of us. Yeah.
So beautiful, because you know they grow up with this now, won't they? You know, they'll never forget this, and they'll pass it on to their children.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
That's beautiful, and also, you know, they've got quite complicated but such fascinating feelings about their dad now, you know, knowing that he wanted to come back and stuff. Really lovely. I'm wondering, because I know that you do work with plants, and obviously I'm a plant lady. Were there specific plants that came up in this work?
Lots of flowers, actually. Lots of flowers. Yeah, we were very much guided by the flower realm. And so there were quite a few ceremonies that we did which required flowers being put on graves, or flower offerings being made to the spirits. And so I'll give you an example of one. There was one pattern that came up, which was the innocent killing of victims of warfare. So women and children being killed in war. And so in one lifetime, we've been killed as innocent victims of warfare. That was, sorry, that's my timer going off. So that was one of the patterns that came up. And we were told that we needed to make little kind of stick people to represent ourselves in this lifetime. We also needed to make little stick people to represent the ancestors who had also experienced being innocent victims of warfare. And so we were working on ancestral and karmic healing simultaneously for a lot of this work, because there's no point in doing a ceremony just for one side of it if you can do, kill two birds with one stone. So we were setting our intentions quite wide to do these ceremonies for our own souls, for Dan's soul, for our ancestors' souls. And so we made these little stick people. We were told that we needed to dig a grave for them and give them a proper burial, because lots of people who are killed in warfare don't get a proper burial. And so we made a grave in the garden. We put them in the grave. We were told that we needed to collect lots of flowers. And I'm blessed to have a garden full of flowers, as well as lots of healing herbs and fruit and food as well. So the children went off and collected loads of flowers, and we lined the grave with flowers. We put our little stick people in. We covered over the grave. We put flowers on top of the grave. We said the relevant words that we were being guided to say. And those were very intuitive, actually. All of the children got a chance to speak. I said my piece. We said what felt right. And then we were told that we needed to go and lay down on the earth and imagine that we were in our grave and cover ourselves with flowers. And they loved that. We were just laid on the grass, throwing flowers over ourselves. The children absolutely loved it. And it was a bit like a game of sleeping lions, like, right, kids, we're supposed to be dead now, okay? Lay on the floor and see how long you can stay still, which they thought was hilarious because they can't stay still for 5 seconds, So it was kind of slightly macabre game of sleeping lions. But, this is how we processed what is really a very dark subject theme of suicide, and how we process these patterns which were coming up, which was not just about their father's death, but about our deaths in other lifetimes as well. And it was all coming up to be seen, and it was all coming up to be cleared. So yeah, the plants that really wanted to help us were the flowers.
Yeah, and historically it's always been the way, hasn't it? It is the flowers and things like myrtle that you put on the graves. It's interesting, you can process the information over and over again, but it always comes back as the same.
Yeah,
I know you're thinking of or you're creating some work around this for people to learn from you, aren't you?
Yes, I am. I've been very much guided. I've been given the work basically by my spiritual guides to provide this kind of opportunity for people to do what we have just done for their own loved ones. It came through very clearly that there is a lack in our culture of caring for the souls of the dead. People, we just don't have it. This information was wiped out in our culture with the witch trials. And I was listening to a fascinating podcast recently, which was talking about the fact that many of the women who were tried and executed as witches were psychopomps. They were the ones talking to the ancestors. They were the ones channeling information from beyond the veil. And this was one of the, when you go through all of the historical records of the witch trials, this comes up time and time and time again, that these rights and connections with the realm of death and the dead and the ancestors was a big part of what the church and the state was trying to eradicate. And so we've lost all of our ancient rights around death, which are designed for the care of the soul of the deceased. And that's why we have so many intergenerational trauma patterns building up over many generations, because we haven't had that information in our culture for a good 500 years. And so I would say there is a very big gap in our knowledge and in our cultural practices around death. And what I've been told is that I need to start that up again. And I'm sure I'm not the only person. There are, what I always see is once an idea comes up for one person, it's kind of comes up in lots of different places. Yeah.
Everybody picks it up at the same time. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm sure that this is probably coming up for other people as well. This idea that we need to remember and reclaim our rites of passage around death for the benefit of our dearly beloved deceased family members, and then for our ancestors, because ultimately this is for our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, because we are suffering now from the effects of intergenerational trauma. We are suffering now from the effects of our own souls not being at peace for so many incarnations. We are exhibiting the symptoms. Our culture is not healthy. And a large part of that is that we are carrying so many shadow patterns for our ancestors, and they're not healthy. They're not in the light. They're floating around our reality as disembodied ghosts. That's a torment for them, actually. You know, that's a place of torment. It's not hell. It's a place of torment because they're stuck. Those spirits are stuck between the living and the realm of the light, and they need help. And so this is very much the work of the psychopomp, is assisting the spirits of the deceased to cross over. And the biggest part of doing that is bringing peace to their souls. So the work that I'm being asked to bring forward is to help people who have lost members of their family, or if they want to do the ancestral or karmic healing work, you know, to give people a pathway, a step-by-step process of how to do that for themselves. You know, people would have done this for their own families. In indigenous cultures, when people die, they have ceremonies to find out if that person has crossed over. And if they've not crossed over, then they do ceremony, they do ritual to bring that person's soul to peace so that they do cross over. You know, this used to be a very normal part of funeral rites and rites of passage through death, both for the living and for the dead. It benefits everybody. It brings everybody's soul to peace. And I think this is also part of the problem with our culture, is people get trapped in grief because they don't know what to do with it. And the path of elemental remedy and ritual, you know, the elements are our oldest ancestors. They are the ancient medicine of our land, of our earth, actually. And so learning how to use this elemental medicine brings everybody's soul to peace. And we can move forward as a collective that is at peace with itself and not tormented by shadows of trauma for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Yeah.
I am so looking forward to seeing what you produce. It's you speak about it so knowledgeably and assuredly. You come from such a different place to me. You know, I really am like, death can stay a little way away from me, but you are truly inspirational. Will you send me your details so I can put them into the description below so anybody can contact you? And I would say to everybody, please read Joanna's work, because you just will be so inspired by her. She writes so beautifully. She speaks beautifully. She writes really beautiful. But is there anything else you'd like to say before you go?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that my my memoir, as I'm calling it, Tales of a Wandering Witch, is part written. I'm writing chapters as they come through to me, and so, you know, you can follow my story as it unfolds, as I publish each chapter. And I'm sure you'll pop the link, or I'll send you the link to put that in the comments. The karmic and ancestral work that I've been describing is already live. I have that as an offering on my website, so I can send you a link to that. At the moment, that's based on one-to-one training. It's a one-to-one training package where I work one-to-one with people, but I am planning on making that into more of like a group offering. So it'll be a group workshop or a group online offering, possibly a membership. I'm not quite clear on that yet. I'm kind of trying to decide how to offer that. And then the grief ritual, the rite of passage through death, is really the one that wants to come forward the most. And I'm still trying to work out how to offer that at the minute. So that will come later. But people can always join up on my email list to get updates and offers through, you know, when things become available, then obviously the people on my email list hear about it first. And I also have a Facebook page, which I let people know about things on there as well. So I will send you all of those links, and you can post them in your post and your comments below.
I would love it. I feel truly privileged that you spent time with me today. Thanks so much, Joanna.
It's an honour to speak to you, and thank you so much for asking me to come and share my story.
Hopefully we will see you again soon. Stay online, and we'll say bye-bye to everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.